5 bullies thought they controlled a New York subway car. Then, they picked the wrong person. 30 seconds later, the laughter was gone. A minute later, no one wanted to fight. And when the lights came back on, Bruce Lee had the leader completely defeated, without even seeming angry. But the most surprising thing wasn't the fight, it was what he said afterward. Because those words did more damage than any blow. New York, winter of 1972. The rain had been falling for hours, and the city seemed quieter than usual. At that hour, the subway was occupied by workers returning home, people unable to sleep, and travelers who simply had no other choice. Among them was Bruce Lee, sitting silently near the back of the car. He didn't draw anyone's attention, he wore simple clothes, kept a calm expression, and observed the world with an uncommon composure. To the naked eye, he looked like just another person heading home after a long day. No one imagined that, in a matter of minutes, he would be the only one willing to stand up to 5 men who had managed to intimidate an entire subway car. Although he seemed distracted, Bruce Lee observed everything happening around him. He used the reflection of the windows to discreetly monitor the car without drawing attention to himself. It was a habit acquired over time to notice details without becoming part of them. No one seemed to notice his presence, and that was perfect for him. The train advanced several stations in silence. Some passengers got off, but almost no one got on. The night slowly emptied the cars while Manhattan disappeared above their heads. At one of the next stops, an older man entered the train leaning on a cane. It was evident he could not see. He moved calmly down the aisle until he found an empty seat and settled in without asking anyone for help. The other passengers barely looked at him before returning to their own thoughts. On the lapel of his jacket, he wore a small military pin. There was something in his posture that revealed years of discipline and overcome hardships. He remained motionless, with both hands resting on his cane, accustomed to facing the world without expecting much from those around him. From the back of the car, Bruce Lee continued to watch him, not out of pity, but because he had learned to recognize vulnerable people long before trouble found them. Another station passed. Then the doors opened again. 5 men entered the car, making more noise than necessary. Their voices immediately shattered the tranquility that had reigned throughout the journey. They moved with the confidence of those accustomed to bullying others and occupying any space as if it belonged to them. Conversations vanished. Some gazes dropped to the floor, others turned toward the windows. No one said a word. Bruce Lee watched the reflection of the newcomers in the glass and understood immediately that that night was not over yet. The 5 men took over the center of the car as if they were its owners. They spoke loudly, laughed among themselves, and enjoyed the discomfort they provoked. The few passengers who remained did what most people did in those situations, looked the other way and hoped it would all end soon. They didn't take long to find a target. One of the gang members pointed at the blind veteran. The taunts began immediately. First, it was comments and laughter, then imitations of his way of walking and the sound of his cane hitting the floor. The group enjoyed themselves while the rest of the car remained silent. The veteran did not respond. He remained seated, motionless, holding his cane with both hands. He couldn't see what was happening. But he sensed perfectly that the attention of those men was fixed on him, and he also knew that no one intended to intervene. From the back of the car, one of the gang members noticed Bruce Lee for the first time, who was sitting in silence. "What are you looking at, Chinatown?" He got no response. Bruce Lee didn't even look up. His expression didn't change. That indifference seemed to annoy them more than any insult. The gang member let out a laugh and returned to the others. Then, the group leader decided to end the game. He approached the veteran, observed the cane resting between his legs, and without warning, kicked it hard. The cane went sliding across the car and crashed against a metal wall. The sound echoed throughout the train. The old man fell forward and began fumbling on the floor to find it. No one moved. Not the businessman, not the nurse, not the transit officer. That was when something no one expected happened. In the back of the car, Bruce Lee stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make any threatening gesture. He simply stood up, but that simple movement completely changed the atmosphere of the place. The conversations died, the laughter disappeared, even the gang members turned their gaze toward him. Until that moment, he had been invisible. Now, he was the only thing anyone could see. Bruce Lee stood before them without showing fear or anger. His posture was calm, almost too calm for the situation. While the other passengers watched nervously, he seemed completely focused, as if he were seeing something no one else could see. The gang members took only a few seconds to react. Then came the laughter. Look at this. The leader didn't take his eyes off Bruce Lee. He looked him up and down and smiled with contempt. You want to be a hero tonight, Chinatown? His friends celebrated the joke with loud laughter. To them, this was not a confrontation, it was a show. 5 men against 1 in a closed car, far from any help. But Bruce Lee did not respond to the taunts. The laughter grew louder. The leader tilted his head. Or what? Then came the insults, comments directed at his origin, his appearance, and everything they thought could make him react. They were looking to provoke an emotional response. They needed to see it, but they got nothing. Bruce Lee remained motionless. Not a word more, not a gesture, not a change in his expression. The train continued moving through the tunnel. 3 of the gang members were already moving. Without saying it openly, they began to surround Bruce Lee and close off any possible exit. It was evident that this was nothing new for them. Bruce Lee saw them take their positions, and yet he didn't move. You've already demonstrated your strength, he said finally. You've already chosen someone who cannot defend himself. What else do you need to prove? For the first time, the leader's smile disappeared. All his attention was now focused on Bruce Lee. I need you to sit back down. Silence reclaimed the car. No one was breathing normally. No one looked away. Then the largest of the group moved behind Bruce Lee and shoved him violently against one of the train's steel poles. The blow echoed throughout the car, and for a fraction of a second, everyone thought it was over. Bruce Lee absorbed the shove, regained his balance, and placed himself back in front of them. There was no anger or impulsive reaction. He simply returned to his position as if the blow hadn't changed anything. For the first time, something seemed to unsettle the gang members. The biggest one tried to grab him by the jacket to impose his strength, but Bruce Lee moved his hand away with a brief, precise movement. It wasn't a fight. It didn't even look like an effort. A moment later, the gang member's arm was back by his side, not fully understanding what had happened. The atmosphere inside the car began to change. Until that moment, it all seemed like a habitual situation, 5 men intimidating someone they thought was weaker. But now, a different feeling appeared, a silent doubt that began to spread among them. The leader sensed it. He watched Bruce Lee for several seconds, studying him more closely than before. He no longer saw just any passenger. There was something in that tranquility that didn't fit the situation. Then Bruce Lee spoke. The 5 of you. Leave now, you can still leave. No one answered immediately. Even the passengers seemed to hold their breath. The leader held his gaze for a few more seconds. Then, without warning, he extended his arm and grabbed Bruce Lee by the collar of his jacket with all the strength he had. It was his way of ending any conversation, a signal to the others, a declaration that the word game was over. It was the first real mistake he made that night. Bruce Lee didn't back down. He didn't try to pull away. Instead, he turned his body slightly inward, absorbed the tension of the grip, and used it to pin the leader exactly where he needed him. It was a movement so small that no passenger could accurately describe it afterward. They only saw that the leader suddenly no longer controlled his own feet. A moment later, he was leaning against the seats with his arm extended in a direction his body hadn't chosen. The entire car held its breath. Then the other 4 moved forward. The narrow subway aisle became a trap where there was no room for error. But Bruce Lee seemed to understand it better than anyone. He moved calmly, using every inch of the car to his advantage and keeping himself always between the aggressors and the blind veteran. The attacks began to come from different directions. One tried to grab him from behind, another sought to knock him down with his weight, but none of them managed to maintain control for more than a second. Bruce Lee avoided getting trapped. He changed positions and forced his opponents to get in each other's way. From the floor, the veteran listened to everything in silence. He couldn't see what was happening, but he could feel that something had changed. The men who had entered full of confidence were no longer moving the same way. There was tension in their steps, hesitation in their movements. For the first time, they were reacting instead of attacking. One of the gang members managed to land a solid blow on Bruce Lee's ribs. The impact was real. It forced him to step back and lean for an instant against one of the seats. The passengers held their breath. That was what they had been waiting to see, a sign of weakness. Bruce Lee remained motionless for a second, caught his breath, and stood up again without anger, without desperation, as if the blow had simply been another piece of data he needed to process before continuing. The man who had hit him interpreted that as an opportunity and lunged forward to finish the job. It was a mistake. Bruce Lee stepped aside just enough. There was a quick movement, almost impossible to follow with the eye, and the man lost his stability immediately. He ended up falling against the seats while trying to understand what had happened. The silence inside the car became deeper. One of the gang members stopped advancing. Another began to retreat. The youngest of the group no longer tried to participate. He remained next to one of the doors, watching Bruce Lee with a mixture of bewilderment and concern, because there was something none of them could understand. Bruce Lee didn't seem to be fighting with rage. He didn't seem to enjoy the confrontation. He didn't even seem to be trying hard to prove anything. He acted with the serenity of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The leader managed to get to his feet again. The confidence he had shown at the beginning was no longer there. A cut above his eyebrow left a trickle of blood as he observed Bruce Lee with a completely different expression. He had entered that train convinced he controlled the situation. Now he was starting to wonder who the man in front of him really was. Then the train took a sharp turn, the lights flickered, and for an instant, the whole car was plunged into absolute darkness. When they came back on, everything had changed. Bruce Lee was in front of the leader. The man was motionless against the seats while Bruce Lee's forearm rested against his throat. There was no unnecessary force in the move. There was no rage. But everyone understood the same thing upon seeing it. If Bruce Lee had wanted to end it, he could have done so at that very moment. No one moved, no one spoke. The leader breathed with difficulty as he looked at the face in front of him. For the first time since he had entered the train, he was truly seeing him, and what he found was not hatred, nor pride, nor satisfaction, only absolute calm. A calm that was much more unsettling than any threat. Finally, he spoke, "Who the hell are you?" Bruce Lee held his gaze for one more second and then withdrew his arm. Someone tired of seeing cowards hurt people. The silence that followed was heavier than any blow dealt that night. The train continued moving through the tunnels of Manhattan while the passengers tried to understand what they had just witnessed. The fear that had dominated the car for the last few minutes was slowly beginning to disappear. The gang members didn't seem the same. Either some remained leaning against the seats, others avoided looking at Bruce Lee. The aggression with which they had entered the train had evaporated completely. Bruce Lee stepped back a few paces and remained in the center of the aisle. His breathing was calm, his posture was the same as always, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The leader straightened his jacket and lowered his gaze. For the first time, he looked like a man looking for a way out. "Let's go." No one argued. The members of the gang began to head toward the doors in silence. One of them moved slower than the others. It was the youngest of the group. Before leaving, he stopped, looked at the blind veteran, and then lowered his head. "I'm sorry." The apology was barely a whisper. Bruce Lee watched him for a few seconds, then learned to follow better examples. The youngest of the group nodded and continued walking. At that moment, the train began to slow down. The station lights appeared behind the windows, and the doors opened with a long metallic sound. The gang members stepped off without looking back. No one tried to stop them. No one said a word. Among the passengers was a transit officer who had watched everything from the beginning. He had remained motionless while the conflict grew, and he didn't intervene when it ended. He simply left the car and disappeared into the crowd at the station. Some passengers saw him leave. No one called out to him. No one asked him anything. Inside the train, the veteran sat back down with his cane resting on his knees. He was trying to regain his composure, but something had changed. Because that night, he had not only been on the verge of being humiliated, he had also witnessed something he hadn't seen in a long time. Someone willing to act when everyone else decided to look the other way. The veteran cleared his throat and broke the silence. "Is anyone still there?" The question hung in the car. For a few seconds, no one answered. He waited for a response that never came. At that moment, the station announcement sounded. The doors were about to close. Bruce Lee got up from his seat and walked down the aisle. Upon reaching the veteran, he paused for an instant. The old man sensed his presence and turned his head slightly toward him. Neither of them said a word. It wasn't necessary. Some conversations end long before they are spoken. A second later, Bruce Lee continued walking and left the train just as the doors began to close. The veteran slowly extended a hand toward the place where that presence had been moments before, but there was no one left. Outside, the rain continued to fall on the streets of New York. The city continued to move with the same indifference as always, oblivious to what had just happened under its feet. And somewhere between the lights, the traffic, and the night, Bruce Lee disappeared into the crowd as if he had never been there inside the car. The silence remained for several more seconds. No one tried to explain what had happened. No one seemed to find the right words. Over the years, many of the passengers would forget the exact details of that night. They would forget who hit first, how long the fight lasted, or the precise order of events. But they would never forget one feeling, the feeling of the instant when fear stopped controlling that car, the feeling of having seen a person stand up when everyone else remained seated. A blind veteran regaining his dignity, 5 men discovering that violence doesn't always find a victim, and a stranger who appeared, did the right thing, and disappeared before anyone even asked his name. Because some people don't change the world by making noise, they change it in silence and then keep walking.